Sold. To the gentleman in the back row. $742,000. The auctioneer's gavel came down like a gunshot, and just like that, my entire childhood vanished into the hands of a stranger. I stood there in the third row, paddle still half raised, watching everything I'd ever loved slip through my fingers by exactly $3,000. But that's the thing nobody in that room knew, not my greedy aunt standing by the door counting her future profits, not my cousin already calculating his cut, not even the man in the expensive gray suit who'd just outbid me. That house had a secret buried in its walls for 78 years. And the stranger who'd just bought it? He wasn't a stranger at all. He was coming home. Let me take you back to the beginning, to a white Victorian house on Maple Street in Covington, Georgia, with a wraparound porch and a magnolia tree in the front yard that had been there since before the Civil War. That house was my whole world. I'm Wesley Carter, and I spent every summer of my childhood in that house with my grandmother, Eleanor. While other kids went to summer camps or beach vacations, I went to Grandma Eleanor's, and I wouldn't have traded it for anything in the world. She wasn't my biological grandmother, not technically. She was my father's stepmother, having married my grandfather when my dad was already a teenager. But bloodlines never mattered to Eleanor. She loved completely, unconditionally, without reservation. The house on Maple Street had been in her family for generations, or so I'd always believed. It was a place of creaking floorboards that sang familiar songs, of an attic filled with mysteries, of a kitchen that always smelled like cinnamon and brown sugar. Eleanor would tell me stories on that wraparound porch, her rocking chair keeping time with the summer crickets, about the people who'd lived in that house before us. This house has seen joy and sorrow, Wesley, she'd say, her eyes distant with memory. It's seen love found and love lost. It's seen justice and injustice. Walls remember everything, even when people choose to forget. I never understood what she meant. Not until much later. Eleanor passed away when I was 24, and that's when everything started to fall apart. My grandfather had died years before Eleanor, but he'd had children from his first marriage, my Aunt Vivian and her son, my cousin Derek. They'd never liked Eleanor, had always resented that their father remarried, and had been waiting for decades to get their hands on whatever they could. The will was supposed to be straightforward. Eleanor had told me herself that the house would be held in trust, maintained by the family, until certain conditions were met. She'd been vague about the details, and I'd been too grief-stricken to press for more. But Vivian and Derek had lawyers. Expensive ones. And within 6 months of Eleanor's death, they'd managed to challenge the trust, claiming mismanagement and financial necessity. They convinced a judge that the house needed to be liquidated to cover estate expenses I later learned were largely fabricated. By the time I found out what was happening, the auction had already been scheduled. "There's nothing you can do, Wesley," Vivian had said, her voice dripping with false sympathy when I'd confronted her. "The court has decided. The house has to be sold. But don't worry, family will get their fair share. Including you." She'd smiled when she said it, and that smile told me everything I needed to know. My fair share would be whatever scraps were left after she and Derek had taken everything they wanted. I was 31 years old, working as a high school history teacher in Atlanta, and I had exactly $127,000 in savings, my entire life's work. I didn't have enough. I knew I didn't have enough. But I had to try. The auction was held on a Saturday in October, the kind of crisp autumn day that Eleanor would have loved. The magnolia tree in the front yard had dropped its leaves, and the house looked tired, neglected. Vivian hadn't bothered with maintenance since Eleanor's death. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment before going in, remembering all the times I'd run up that front walk as a child, Eleanor waiting on the porch with lemonade and a smile. The screen door still had the same squeak. The third porch step still sagged in the middle. Some things don't change. Some things change forever. There were maybe 40 people at the auction, neighbors, investors, a few antique dealers hoping to pick up furniture on the cheap. Vivian stood near the back in a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary, Derek beside her looking bored and checking his phone. They barely acknowledged me when I walked in. I found a spot in the third row and waited, my paddle clutched in sweating hands. The auctioneer went through his preliminary remarks, explained the terms, and then started the bidding at $500,000. My hand went up immediately. For a few glorious minutes, I was in the lead. Then the man in the gray suit raised his paddle. $600,000, the auctioneer called. I'd noticed him earlier, early 60s, silver hair, expensive clothes, the kind of quiet confidence that comes from having nothing to prove. He sat alone in the back row, and there was something strange about the way he looked at the house. Not like an investor calculating profit margins. More like someone seeing a ghost. $625, I countered. $650. $675. I was already past my limit, already doing the calculations of how many years it would take to pay off this debt. But I couldn't stop. This was my home. This was Eleanor's legacy. 700,000. The auctioneer looked at me. The whole room looked at me. I took a breath. Raised my paddle. 739,000. It was everything. Every penny I had, every penny I could borrow. It was my life reduced to a number. The man in the gray suit didn't hesitate. 742. And just like that, it was over. The gavel fell. People started gathering their things. Vivian was already making her way toward the auctioneer's table, her face bright with triumph. I couldn't move. All those summers. All those memories. The attic where I'd found my great-grandfather's letters. The kitchen where Eleanor taught me to make her famous peach cobbler. The porch where she'd told me stories until the stars came out. Gone. All of it gone. I was still standing there, frozen, when a voice spoke beside me. You bid hard for this place. I turned. The man in the gray suit was standing next to me, his eyes on the house, not on me. It was my grandmother's, I said, my voice hollow. My home. I know. Something in the way he said it made me look at him more closely. He was older than I'd first thought, maybe late 60s, with deep lines around his eyes and a weathered quality to his face that spoke of hard years. Do I know you? I asked. No. He finally turned to look at me, and I saw something in his eyes I couldn't identify. But I knew your grandmother. Or rather, I knew of her. And I knew the people who lived in this house before her. My blood went cold. What do you mean? The man reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an old photograph, creased, faded, clearly decades old. It showed a black family standing in front of a house. A man, a woman, 3 children. The house was 247 Maple Street. My name is Harold Morrison, the man said quietly. My grandfather, Thomas Morrison, built this house in 1919. He lived here with his wife and children until 1946. Until your family took it from him. I don't remember walking to the coffee shop down the street. I don't remember ordering anything. I just remember sitting across from Harold Morrison while he laid out documents on the table between us, deeds, letters, newspaper clippings, court records, and told me a story that shattered everything I thought I knew. Thomas Morrison had been a successful black businessman in the 1920s and 30s, one of the few in Covington. He'd built the house on Maple Street with his own money, his own hands. He'd raised his family there, built a life there, became a respected member of the community. Then came 1946. There was a white family that wanted the property, Harold explained, his voice steady but heavy. The Dawsons. They had connections, political, legal, financial. They made my grandfather an offer. He refused. He'd built that house. It was his legacy. What happened? What happened to a lot of black families back then? Suddenly there were code violations that had never existed before. Property tax assessments that tripled overnight. Legal challenges to his original deed. And when none of that worked. Harold paused, looking down at the photograph. There was a fire. In my grandfather's business. No one was hurt, but it destroyed everything. He couldn't afford the legal battles anymore. Couldn't afford to fight. He was forced to sell. For a fraction of what the property was worth. The Dawsons got the house, and my family got nothing but a lesson in how justice works in America. I felt sick. The Dawsons, that was Eleanor's maiden name. The house came through her family. Yes. Your grandmother's grandfather was Raymond Dawson. The man who stole my family's home. We sat in silence for a long moment. The coffee shop buzzed around us, people living their normal lives, while my entire understanding of my history crumbled into dust. I didn't know, I finally said. Eleanor she never told me any of this. I believe she knew. There were attempts, over the years, to contact her. To explain the history. To ask for some kind of acknowledgement. Harold's voice was tired. She never responded. I thought about Eleanor, kind, loving Eleanor, who'd taught me about justice and compassion and doing the right thing. Had she known? Had she sat on that porch telling me stories while knowing her family had built their legacy on stolen ground? Why now? I asked. Why did you come to the auction? After all these years? Harold pulled out another document, a legal brief, thick with legalese and official stamps. 10 years ago, I started working with a legal advocacy group that specializes in property theft cases. Cases like my grandfather's, where families were forced off their land through fraud, intimidation, or corruption. It took a decade of research, but we finally assembled enough evidence to prove what happened in 1946. You have a legal claim to the house? I had a legal claim. The courts agreed, the original transfer was fraudulent, accomplished through illegal coercion. We won the case 3 months ago. He smiled grimly. But by the time the verdict came through, your aunt had already started the auction process. The court couldn't stop it in time. All I could do was show up and buy back what should have been mine all along. I stared at him. You paid $742,000 for a house that was legally stolen from your family. I paid $742,000 to come home. I went back to the house with Harold that evening. Vivian had already left, check in hand, probably already planning how to spend her share. The auction company had locked up, but Harold had the keys now. He'd completed the paperwork that afternoon. We stood on the porch in the fading light, two strangers connected by a house and a history neither of us had fully understood. "You wanted this place badly," Harold said. "I could see it in your eyes at the auction." "Why?" So I told him. About Eleanor. About the summers. About the stories and the memories and the feeling that this house was the only place I'd ever truly belonged. I told him about the attic treasures and the kitchen lessons and the porch conversations that had shaped who I became. "I grew up believing this house was my heritage," I said. "Now I find out my heritage was built on theft." Harold was quiet for a long moment. "Can I show you something?" He led me inside, through rooms I knew as well as my own heartbeat, up the stairs to the second floor, and then to a door I'd never paid much attention to, a small closet at the end of the hallway. "My grandfather told my father about this," Harold said, opening the door. "My father told me. A secret space, built into the wall, where Thomas Morrison kept his most valuable documents." He reached past the hanging rod, pressed something, and a panel in the back wall swung open. Inside was a small metal box, covered in decades of dust. "I never knew if it would still be here," Harold said softly. "If anyone had found it. If it had survived." He opened the box. Inside were papers, old, yellowed, fragile. A deed. Letters. A family Bible with names and dates going back generations. And photographs. Dozens of photographs of the Morrison family, in this house, living their lives before everything was taken from them. "This is my family," Harold said, his voice breaking for the first time. "This is who we were. This is what they stole." Over the following weeks, Harold and I became unlikely friends. He'd tell me stories about his grandfather, about the Morrison family legacy, about what it had meant to grow up knowing that your history had been erased. I'd tell him about Eleanor, about my own complicated feelings of love and betrayal. And together, we discovered something neither of us had expected. Eleanor had known. But not in the way I'd feared. Hidden in her own papers, papers Vivian had never bothered to examine in her rush to liquidate the estate, were letters. Letters Eleanor had written but never sent, addressed to the Morrison family. Letters expressing shame, regret, a desire to make amends that she'd never found the courage to act on. "I have lived in a house that was never mine to inherit," one letter read, dated 1987. "I have benefited from a crime committed before I was born. I have searched for a way to return what was stolen, but the legal obstacles seemed insurmountable, and my own family would never consent. All I can do is care for this house as its steward, not its owner, and hope that someday, somehow, justice finds its way home." There was more. Eleanor had established a trust, not the one Vivian had challenged, but a secret one, funded quietly over decades. Its purpose, to support legal efforts to restore property to families who'd been victims of discriminatory theft. The advocacy group Harold had worked with? Eleanor had been one of their anonymous donors for 20 years. She'd been trying to make it right. In her own flawed, incomplete way, she'd been trying. The confrontation with Vivian came 2 months after the auction. Harold and I had compiled everything, the historical records, Eleanor's letters, the legal verdict proving the original theft. We'd also uncovered evidence that Vivian had known about Eleanor's secret trust and had deliberately concealed it from the probate court to force the auction. We presented it all at a family meeting that Vivian had called, expecting to distribute the auction proceeds. "This is ridiculous," she sputtered, her face going red as she flipped through the documents. "Ancient history. It has nothing to do with, it has everything to do with it," I said. "This house was never ours to sell. It was stolen property. And you knew about Eleanor's wishes. You knew she wanted to find a way to return it to the Morrison family, and you buried it." "I don't have to listen to this." "Actually, you do." Harold spoke up, calm and measured. "Because my legal team has already filed a motion with the probate court. We're challenging the auction proceeds. Given the evidence of fraudulent concealment on your part, there's a strong possibility that the entire sale will be voided and the funds frozen." Vivian's face went white. "You can't." "We can. And we will." I stood up. "Eleanor spent her whole life trying to figure out how to make this right. You spent 6 months trying to profit from her death. We're done letting you win." Derek, who'd been silent throughout, finally spoke. "Mom, maybe we should." "Shut up, Derek." But I could see it in her eyes, the calculation, the realization that she'd lost. She could fight, drag it through courts for years, but the evidence was overwhelming and the legal precedents were clear. The Morrison family had a legitimate claim, and she had been caught trying to obstruct it. In the end, she settled. The auction proceeds were divided according to Eleanor's original wishes, a significant portion going to the Morrison family, another portion to the advocacy group, and the rest establishing a foundation in Eleanor's name to continue the work of property restitution. Vivian got nothing. I got something better than money. I got the truth. The formal transfer of the house back to the Morrison family happened on a sunny afternoon in December, almost exactly a year after Eleanor's death. Harold stood on the porch, his porch, finally, surrounded by family members I'd come to know over the previous months. His daughter and grandchildren. Cousins who'd only heard stories about the house on Maple Street. A 93-year-old aunt who had been born in one of the upstairs bedrooms before the family was forced out. 78 years, Harold said, his voice thick with emotion. 78 years since my family last stood on this porch as its rightful owners. 3 generations of waiting. A lifetime of wondering if justice would ever come. He turned to me, standing at the edge of the gathering. And it came through the most unexpected door. Through a man who loved this house as much as we did. Through a woman who spent her life trying to undo a wrong she'd inherited. He paused. Eleanor Carter may have lived in a house that wasn't hers, but she honored it. She preserved it. She kept my family's secret space undiscovered, our documents safe, our history intact. And in her own way, she brought us home. I wiped my eyes. I wasn't the only one. This house has seen joy and sorrow, I said, echoing Eleanor's words from all those years ago. It's seen love found and love lost. It's seen justice and injustice. But today, finally, it sees something it's been waiting 78 years to see. What's that? Harold's granddaughter asked. A wrong made right. A family made whole. A home returned to the people who built it. I still visit the house on Maple Street. Harold and his family have made me welcome, more than welcome, actually. His granddaughter calls me Uncle Wesley, and I've become the unofficial family historian, helping them piece together the Morrison legacy from documents and photographs and stories passed down through generations. The magnolia tree is still in the front yard. The third porch step still sags. The screen door still squeaks. Some things don't change. But some things change exactly as they should. Eleanor's picture hangs in the hallway now, next to the photographs of the Morrison family. Harold insisted. She was a steward, he said. Not perfect, but faithful. She deserves to be remembered. I think about her often, especially on summer evenings when I sit on that wraparound porch and watch the fireflies. I think about the stories she told me, the lessons she taught me, the complicated love she carried for a house that was never truly hers. She couldn't undo history. None of us can. But she spent her life trying to bend the arc toward justice, even when she couldn't see where it would land. It landed here. On a porch in Covington, Georgia, where 3 generations of Morrisons are finally home. And in a strange, unexpected way, so am I. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I've got more stories about hidden truths, family secrets, and the moments that change everything. And if you have your own story about justice delayed but not denied, share it in the comments below. Sometimes the stories we tell are the only way the truth survives.